morning. My name is Renata Johnson. I'm currently a Doctor of Public Policy student at Liberty University, and today I would like to read my research question, and that is the title of my research paper, The American Dream: How to Remedy Real Estate Discrimination in America and Disallow the Oppression that Limits Access to Property, land rights, and mineral rights. I'll first go on to read my abstract. In the beginning of my doctoral research, my aim is to reveal what theories and what redistributive policies will address and further remedy the growing concerns of inequality and real estate opportunities in the United States for African American families. The goal of writing this is to allocate and redistribute subsidies from overfunded areas of government and redistribute them into overlooked working middle-class communities seeking reparations. This paper is also to serve as a guide to amend and protect middle-class communities who have suffered from corporate government greed, from seizing employment opportunities to offset capitalistic gold mining, and by rejecting the sum zero mindset. By applying theory backed by biblical examples, the intent of this paper in its purest form, which is to right the wrongdoing, to build and keep wealth in those communities, learn from our history, and determine what ideas we can take from, especially the pioneers of our past. For example, Maggie Lena Walker, the first Black woman to own a bank, for example, and incorporate them with modern techniques to restore ghettos and tenements back to their glorious heyday. To rebuild Black Wall Street, this paper is to create and assist in eliminating unjustly enriched actors that aided in demobilizing ethnic communities, bring back the opportunities to misaligned and disenfranchised communities through gentrification of neighborhoods and or radical policies intended to fast-track home ownership. Some of the key words that you will hear throughout this is American apartheid, Fair Housing Act of 1968, the 1989 Housing Discrimination Study, the 1948 Supreme Court decision of Shelley versus Kramer, the Federal Housing Authority, and the Fair Housing Act amendments of 1988. A common theme that has resonated throughout my examination of many academic journal articles involving unlawful real estate practices has been ongoing racial restrictive covenants, racial zoning, and racial reverters. Although the Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibits discrimination in housing, current data by way of audits and studies still have indicators that prove that home ownership among Black and brown minorities have either plateaued or declined in the 21st century. The 1989 Housing Discrimination Study set out to successfully measure and prove the theory of racial discrimination in fair housing practices. A technique used to prove this theory is as follows. A fair housing audit is a research technique designed to determine whether housing agents treat people differently solely because of their membership in a particular group. Each audit is conducted by two teammates, each of whom visit the same housing agency to inquire about available housing. The audit is set up so the two teammates are equally qualified for housing but differ in their group membership. One teammate might be white, for example, and the other African American. More common themes that may plague the real estate community as it relates to discrimination are techniques used to redline potential ethnic homeowners and the use of discriminatory steering practices used by real estate agents and brokers alike to assign whites in jurisdictions that espouse greater resources while steering Black and brown customers into deteriorating communities with the less accommodating resources. Since the Taubers published their innovative book based on the 1960 census, numerous studies have documented that Blacks and whites seldom share the same neighborhoods within the nation's large metropolitan areas. Racial segregation is so extensive and persistent that the term American apartheid, popularized by Douglas Massey and Nancy Denton, is now frequently used to describe urban America. And another approach or angle to housing discrimination and disparities in Black and brown communities is also the unique look at landlord discrimination in rental housing markets. If ever the task proved too overwhelming to measure housing inequality, let's not forget that many renters experience similar experiences. Also pulled from the 1989 discrimination study, using Chamberlain's fixed effect logic estimation, we develop a national representative measure of the incident of discrimination in landlord behavior and conduct hypothesis tests on the incident and causes of discrimination. The result indicates widespread discrimination across several types of landlord behavior and support the hypothesis that landlords discriminate both out of personal prejudice and in response to the prejudice of present and future white clients. With the housing market extending itself to both homeowners and home renters, far more assumptions are made as it relates to the home buyer's name and generated through electronic communication. The idea can also be measured. We reveal home seekers' race to landlords by sending emails from names with a high likelihood of association with either whites or African Americans. Generally, discrimination occurs against African American names. However, when the content of the email messages insinuates home seekers with high social class, discrimination is non-existent. Racial discrimination is more severe in neighborhoods that are near tipping points in racial composition and for units that are part or of a larger building. With a more precise search in peer-reviewed journals in the subject matter of real estate discrimination, I was met with copious journal articles that had endless studies that galvanized any assumptions and made the problem of real estate discrimination as an inorganic stain in our American history. With literature spanning over 6,800 references in this unsavory subject matter, I surely regained my footing and, like Paul Revere, will mount my proverbial horse and state without reverence that the problem of real estate discrimination is just as much a problem today and continues to be an injustice for Black and brown Americans everywhere. Real estate discrimination was toxic because industry and manufacturing were purposely located in Black neighborhoods and residents were subject to pollution. The copious rat bites and deaths from lead poisoning created toxic environments for Black Americans too. Importantly, real estate discrimination was government endorsed from the local government sanctioned race-based zoning. Ordinances of the early 1900s to the expulsive and exclusionary zoning of the more recent era. The government, through the FHA, made sure that white people could obtain mortgages with lower interest rates, long fixed rates, and minimal down payments while they systemically denied the same benefits to Black people. I have identified the implications of my literary assessment for my future research to allow for remedies that may aid the healing process and the reorganization of displaced Black and Brown families who seek the American dream, but due to no fault of their own, were relegated to less desirable and toxic locales created due to exclusionary and expulsive zoning practices. The most influential sources cited through my literary review has been the Supreme Court decision of eminent domain, Berman versus Parker in 1954, where Berman displaced Black Americans in the name of blight removal. There were no comparable efforts in 1954 to apply this concept of public welfare to white neighborhoods. Racially restrictive covenants that proved unenforceable after the 1948 Supreme Court decision of Shelley versus Kramer. This article discusses the fact that hundreds of thousands of racially restrictive covenants were recorded post-Shelley. It ties the impact of those covenants to present-day iniquities. It also explores attempts by state legislatures to contend with racially restrictive covenants on land records in the modern era. As it relates to racially restrictive covenants, they live on, and the implications that are no longer enforceable is countered by the homeowner's deed and titling company oftentimes make decisions to either redact the history of the deed or simply brush it off as if they cannot enforce. Rose argues that these undisclosed covenants can be revoked, but not without financial penalties to discourage the owner or potential homeowners' pursuits. The most literal way in which racial covenants live on is in their continued presence in land records. Take a house built in a 1941 suburban development. Given the importance of FHA mortgage insurance for everyone involved at the time, the builder, the broker, the buyer, the mortgage banker, the title insurer, the house is very likely to have had a racial covenant in its initial documents of title. And the covenant is very likely to be written in such a way as to run with the land for as long as the house stands, and possibly even longer. Racially restrictive covenants, which excluded African American homebuyers from particular neighborhoods and many American cities until 1950. The directly affected cohort here would consist of all actual and would-be African American homebuyers in a place on or before 1950. There appear to be common conclusions in this literature about future research that might be warranted, such as reparations, where scholars have argued that reparations lead to immediate reduction in racial wealth inequality. Swanson argued that another concerted effort in reversing this discriminatory practice is through land and wealth redistribution, eradication of racial zoning, race-based covenants, race nuances, and racial reverters. Real estate discrimination can severely impede access to home ownership of Black Americans. Home ownership is often the best way to increase wealth and build financial equity. Housing is important for economic well-being and wealth accumulation because home ownership has traditionally been the best way to build household wealth and also to qualify for better housing. Establish credit worthiness and building financial equity. The homeownership gap between white and Black Americans is 30%. The homeownership gap between Black and white Americans is not improving. It was the same in 2020 as it was in 1970. This gap is a testament to the persistence of real estate discrimination in the United States. Some common errors and oversights that may need to be corrected are how Black and brown renters experience real estate discrimination as it relates to interest rates and penalties. Note that a loan from an all-Black neighborhood holding everything equal, including termination behavior, would pay out nearly 0.4% more than a corresponding loan from a neighborhood with no Blacks. Thus, not only are these effects statistically significant, they are of considerable economic consequence, at least to the borrower. Another oversight may be to look closer at other attempts to discourage real estate discrimination by the sending of warning letters to the most likely offenders in the real estate market. The authors from the Regional Science of Economic Journal combined evidence conducted from two field experiments that provided significant insight into specific behaviors of subjected real estate discrimination in the private rental housing market. This article evaluates the effect of a nationwide public policy design to reduce discrimination in access to accommodations in the private rental housing market. We carried out our correspondent test with 3,260 real estate agencies to assess the likelihood of discrimination based on ethnic origin. This test allows us to identify about 10% of agencies likely to exhibit discriminatory behavior. These agencies were randomly divided into two groups. One group received a formal letter warning them they had been monitored and reminded them of the legal sanctions to which they were exposing themselves, and the other group received no communication. We then retested all of these real estate agencies for 2 years and compared their responses. The results indicated the warning message was a substantial and long-lasting effect on discrimination. It decreases discrimination in the treatment by 80% for at least 2 years. Although each of these oversights warrant further analysis to assist with disbanding a lifetime of harms bestowed upon Black and brown communities throughout the United States. In September of 1988, then President Reagan signed amendments to the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968. If the amendments are ultimately upheld as constitutional, assuming they are challenged, they will create the most sweeping set of civil rights enforcement mechanisms, litigation incentives, remedies, and penalties ever focused on the commercial activities of real estate developers, banks, mortgage bankers, participants in the second mortgage market, builders, brokers, and operators of private multifamily housing developments. The active regulations make clear that successful litigants and victims of discrimination, in addition to having access to full range of equitable remedies, are to be awarded full damages, including monetary awards for the pain and suffering and humiliation of discrimination, as well as punitive damages with no statutory cap or limit. In conclusion, as Dr. King once noted about the complex plight of Black people in the United States, we will make progress if we accept the fact that 400 years of sinning cannot be canceled out in 4 minutes of atonement. We must continue to make steadfast progress through multifaceted approaches at all levels of government if we are to reverse the centuries of health, wealth, and equity lost through real estate discrimination. And thank you.